So 6 months ago I signed up for a full Ironman without any previous triathlon experience. My objectives for this project were as follows: to train hard for the next 6 months, to learn as much as possible about triathlon and get all the equipment necessary, complete a full Ironman, and to do it all without a coach, all by myself basically. Sounds reasonable? Didn't think so. The beginning of training was terrible. I could barely swim more than 1k and I was struggling to bike for more than 40 minutes. I was only pretty good at running, but even that was hard as I was just coming out of a massive bulk season. But I kept going, training every single day of the week, fighting for my life in each swimming and cycling session, trying to collect all the gear, which was also a challenge for me financially. So I had to go really hard at my job to get a raise, to be able to afford all the equipment and the event itself. And I was making good progress. Each week I was a little lighter, I could swim further, bike for longer and run faster. I also watched hundreds of videos to learn as much as I could about all three sports, including learning about bikes from a mechanical standpoint, which sucked big time. 6 months went by way too fast, and at the end of September I flew to Spain, to a lovely little town called Calella, to try and become an Ironman. Needless to say, I was extremely stressed out. I did a few last training sessions to get used to the climate, and I've set up everything for a race. Now the only thing left to do was to complete a full Ironman. What could possibly go wrong? As I walked to the start line, the energy was insane. You could tell that everyone was sort of battling pre-race anxiety, and I was one of those people. I've been terrified of open and deep waters my whole life, and I knew that the swim was not only gonna be difficult for my body, but for my mind also. I was absolutely shitting my pants all the way up to the start line, and then I got started. And the stress sort of went away, replaced by a feeling of panic. There were so many of us, and therefore I was getting kicked in the face right from the beginning. I drank a lot of salt water and puked a couple of times, and the race barely began. I started counting my strokes, and when I got to the first buoy and an initial shock passed, I became hyper focused, and the next kilometer of the swim was actually pretty good. I settled into my stroke, I felt really buoyant thanks to the salt water and my wetsuit, and I was actually making a pretty good time. That is, until we took a turn and started going the other way. Unfortunately, the current was against us for the longest part of the swim. I was crashing into wave after wave, swallowing ungodly amounts of salt water, and I was trying really hard to see the next buoy, which was also pretty difficult considering that the sun was shining right into my eyes. I also started to feel my neck chafe against my wetsuit, even though I used plenty of lube. And just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I got kicked in my goggles. Thankfully they didn't come off, but it did cause a lot of swelling, and I could barely see anything with my left eye for the remaining part of the swim. Mind you, I was only around halfway at that point. I tried hard not to think about sharks, but I couldn't help myself sometimes due to my phobia. When I was swimming, I was repeating in my head, don't think about the sharks, don't think about the sharks, all the while thinking about the sharks. But somehow I pushed through and finally finished the swim after 1 hour and 37 minutes of struggle. After the horrible swim, I was foolishly hoping for an easy bike leg. Unfortunately, it ended up being even more painful for me. The main issue was that there were so many of us on the course. At one point there must have been around 3,000 of us on the course, combining participants from half an Ironman and a full Ironman. I was way too scared to overtake people often, and every time someone was overtaking me I was extremely tense. I tried to keep my nose clean, but drafting was also a big issue. But the absolute worst thing that happened on that course that day was the death of one of the participants. I first saw an ambulance and then I saw the accident itself. Apparently 2 participants bumped into each other and both ended up severely injured. It was only after the race that I found out that one of the guys died. May he rest in peace. It made me very aware of the risk right from the beginning, and I knew I had to stay really focused for the remaining part of the cycling stage. Anyhow, I've spent over 7 hours on that shitty road bike, struggling to keep going in a few spots, hitting many mental walls along the way, but once again I survived. Having finished 2/3 of the race in over 8 hours and still having to do the whole marathon, it felt like a bizarre dream. As I was putting on my running gear, I tried to cheer myself up with the thought that basically the worst parts for me were over and now it was time for something that I'm actually good at. And I must say the first 10k weren't bad at all. I still had some energy left in the tank and I was very excited. But little did I know that this feeling was not going to last. I hit my first wall around 14th kilometer, which is a little sooner than I was hoping for. Between kilometers 14 and 37 I was in my own little version of hell. I was really burned after the whole day in the sun. I had chafings on my neck, my butt and my legs. Also my foot started to hurt real bad and I was limping more than I was running. I later found out that it was a stress fracture. So at that point during the race I was in a pretty bad spot, both mentally and physically. And I wasn't sure if I was going to finish at all. I wasn't even sure if I was gonna make the cutoff. During the second half my body just refused to swallow anything. Somehow I managed to squeeze in a few gels and digest them, but I honestly wanted to puke after every bite. The situation was pretty bad, and so once again I resorted to counting my steps and I tried to only think about the next refreshment station. I was also lucky enough to have such a great support during the race from my family, and at times I was also counting how many kilometers I had left to see my family again, and I think that really helped me. And for the last 5k I had a sudden burst of energy. I knew I was so close to finishing and that I still had some time before the cutoff, and so finally, after 14 hours and 54 minutes, my moment came. I do not think I've ever experienced a greater sort of relief in my life. And yes, at the end of this project I had to get the cringiest tattoo possible. Am I glad I did it? Yes, absolutely. Am I gonna regret it sometime in the future? Probably.